speech. I'd like to request the third speaker from Team Proposition to conclude substantive speeches for Proposition.
Opposition's case was characterized by shifty language and shifty situations. When the second speaker realized that they didn't have a cogent conception of what a post-conflict state was, they changed their characterization whenever it was convenient for their arguments. Let's give you an example. On one hand, he says that legal systems would have the incentive to be fair, free and fair, to increase stability in the country. But on the other, at the exact same time, he talks about powerful rhetoric, like these people shot bullets in children's heads. We need to get them right now. Notice what their first speaker said about the healing power of executions. I don't think they can claim that the legal system will be both reasonable and executing everyone at the same time. This is not something they can stand for. More importantly, they missed the point of Garrett's substantive. Notice that there are three responses, hidden argument on truth and reconciliation committees. That was not what Garrett was talking about. Garrett's constructive is important because their case relies on picture painting of outside as violent, hateful, and full of people who demand retribution, when it's really about peace and reconciliation. This argument disproved that because our comparative is not one of this hateful rhetoric that they try to characterize. Moreover, the second tier of this argument talked about transitioning to democracy in the long term, something that wasn't even mentioned in their previous speaker. They need a response to this argument because it takes them at their best. I think third speaker is a little too late. I want to talk about three things. First, upholding justice. Second, we save lives in the short term. Third, we save lives in the long term. I'm going to spend more time on the first point of contention because that's where we got more engagement from them, but nonetheless we think that saving lives is the most important criteria in this debate. So first on justice. We identified a contradiction in their case. On one hand, they said that nascent societies need to develop their legal systems, but at the same time, their policy asserts that there's clear legal precedent and laws for them to do this. No thank you. The reality is, they don't have clear precedent. We agree that these are nascent societies in which the legal systems are still developing. We don't think they can rely on the Geneva Convention either because there's no specificity to each society. But moreover, Matthew gives you structural reasons as to why leaders in these countries don't even have the incentive to refer to the Geneva Convention. First, that the victor of the conflict now controls the legal machinery of the state. Second, that new leaders are eager to satisfy the populace by having harsh punishments on perpetrators. Third, that post-conflict states often have a power vacuum. So to deter competition for power, they need to over-prosecute. Structural analysis gave to Matthew, we got a one-line response in second speaker. He said that new leaders have a strong incentive to solidify power. Yes, but why would you be fair to solidify power when you can just play up emotions to increase your support and get stability through that? We think that if they really want to solidify their power, they have no incentive to be fair, rather they have incentive to over-prosecute so people's emotions carry on supporting them. Garrett tells you that our comparative is very different because TRCs are much less likely to be controlled by the victors because they focus on personal truths. So don't let them say they stand for justice. No, they stand for an insidious caricature of justice that serves the powerful. Then they say this strange line in second speaker, that we rather over-prosecute than let some go free. Why is this the case? We think this is a complete assertion. We think that legal systems don't run on this principle. That's why we're innocent until proven guilty. Let's extend this even further. We think that if justice doesn't affect everyone equally, we shouldn't have justice at all. Here's a very clear analogy. Imagine a law that said that white people could murder black people, but black people couldn't murder white people. No thank you. We think we reject that law straight away. Why? Because you recognize that for justice to even have value, it needs to affect everyone equally. That was present in Matthew, no response down the line. Now let's be clear about this whole neglecting victims business. They say that victims won't agree to TRCs. That's not true. We reject the notion that people fought to make sure this guy was executed. We think that people fought against dictators to prevent this oppression, to kick them out of power. Second, there's no reason why we can't do this redistribution of assets on our side as well without prosecuting. We think that seizing dictators' assets and distributing them to the country is already standard procedure whether or not you prosecute the dictator. So there was no reason why we neglect victims on our side. In fact, no thank you. We think that during TRCs, when you acknowledge your wrongdoing as opposed to when you deny it during a trial, that's when you deny victims suffering far more on their side. Third, we think the best thing to do for these victims is to stop there being any future victims. That's where our entire clash on saving lives comes in. Fourth, even if we lose this clash on victims, which I don't think we do, we think it's less important than the principles. Why is this the case? Look, We sympathize with victims, but we don't let victims decide trials and status quo because we recognize that principles of justice are more important. So to be clear, we don't neglect victims. Even if we do, we think that we refuse to neglect justice. Hold on. What have we shown you in this clash? We win on justice because it's proportional and equal on our side. But even if you don't, Gareth gives you detailed analysis on how justice is instrumental in order to prioritize saving lives in this debate. Before moving on to my second contention, sure.
If the legal system is so rigged that any debate on conflict changes is impossible, this boils down to a principal debate of which government better fulfills its responsibility to its citizens.
Sure, even if it was a principal debate, we think that we've proven that we better this responsibility. Second, I dispute that this is the case. We just think that in this case of legal systems, we think that the people who are controlling this legal machinery simply cannot be trusted to make it fair. There's no reason why this can't be a practical debate. Second question on saving lives right now. Here's where we address as second speaker substantive. We think that there's no reason why prosecution helps economic redistribution, no mechanism. They're hiding behind their non-exclusive mechanism of reparations. We do that too. What do we tell you about saving lives right now? Matthew tells you there are situations where those in power know they will lose the conflict in time to come, so retaining power is incentive equal on both sides. But on their side, they have the incentive not to get punished, and therefore they will drag out this conflict for as long as possible. There are two responses in the second speaker. The first is, we will try to stop the war by stopping guerrilla warfare. How on earth are you going to do this? They can't leave a one-line thing on, we will try to stop war and expect that to be a response. Their better line of response is, this debate is about post-conflict societies. Yes, but this misunderstands the argument. Yes, this debate is about post-conflict societies, but when we implement the policy in post-conflict societies, it affects decision-making everywhere. This argument stands, we need a real response from third speaker. Let's extend this. Not only is it bad to prolong the conflict to save lives, we think that leads a backsliding into oppression too. Like in Libya, where there were calls to return to Gaddafi's reign because he promised stability. But more importantly, the second mechanism we told you how we save lives right now is to make power-sharing deals and negotiating groups much more likely on our side. Again, brought to you in Matthew, no response. We need one in second speaker, in third speaker. What have we shown you in this clash? We save lives right now because one, we don't increase the propensity for conflict. Two, we don't prolong conflicts. And three, we make power sharing deals more likely. Third clash on saving lives in the long term. There are three mechanisms for stability in first speaker were all flipped when we proved to you that they don't get justice on their side. So the first speaker thankfully enumerated all the harms of a bad legal system, we think that applies even more on their side. But more importantly, we told you about three possible scenarios for post-conflict states and how their model makes future conflicts more likely in each scenario. They chose to respond to one. I'm just going to repeat this, all structural analysis present in Matthew. First, he told you that in places with sectarian violence, we are able to cross sectarian divides in the long term. No response. Second, in places where there's a power vacuum, new leaders abuse their policy to eliminate opposition. Again, no response. The third thing we told you was that in places where strongmen remain in power, they use opposition's policy to crack down further. To be clear, our entire case doesn't hinge on this premise. It's one of the three scenarios we gave you. They need to engage with the rest of them. But even so, I think the response in second speaker misses the point. Because surely our policy applies to all governments. We think that even in dictatorial governments, when they can't abuse the policy on their side, that means that they can't crack down on civilians even more. So what have we proven here? We save lives in the long term and move towards peaceful nation building in the long term in all these three circumstances. What does third speaker of opposition have to do to win this debate? First, they need to engage with the majority of circumstances. Second, they need to take down the principles of justice. And third, they need some response to Garrett's constructive. I think it's far too late for them to do any of this. On our side, we uphold justice, we save lives now, and we save lives in the future. We get a better future, opposition is stuck in the past. Very proud to close.
I'd like to thank that speaker for that speech and request the third speaker from Team Opposition to conclude substantives for opposition and the debate.
What side government is talking about is not a post-conflict society. It is a dictatorial regime that does not have a rule of law. It is a country where conflict still exists. Panel, this debate is under the assumption that after conflicts exist, how can we have the best construction period to integrate these people together? That's exactly the context that we're going to be debating on in this debate. One clarification I want to make before going on to my three clashes, which is the fact that they said themselves that they don't want to implement a value judgment because that might be unfair, because we don't have precedents. But we think that's pretty horrific in a sense that you don't need precedents to accurately value judge the people who killed innocent civilians, who raped your parents, and who looted your home. You don't need these kind of perfect legal system. We outside opposition rather operate in a world where the not perfect legal system gets better over time, but we don't forget about these scars, the incidents that happen. The first clash I'm going to be talking about is different from the generic first principle clash, because I want to go right away in comparing the alternatives between our world and their world. We think this is crucial because their entire arguments hinge on the idea that their peace committee thing is a better alternative than retribution. The first question we must ask in this clash is why do we have laws and punishment in the first place? Why is it that in a criminal justice system, we don't allow people to just meet together and always solve the situation? Because that is simply unlikely to happen in a context where conflicts and genocides happen. Just inviting each other to have a peaceful talk and talk about each other's stories is not necessarily a likely outcome in solving these kind of situations in the first place. The example they gave to response to my PLI was Colombia, a country that is now gang-ridden and where governments continue to fight against these kind of gangs in the first place. The end goal is conflicts still exist, so their peace committee idea is not the most effective solution. The reason why we have laws is to provide objective punishments for objective crimes. And the reason why we have courts is to whether or not decide that the person who made these actions is a criminal or not. We continue to stand by this premise because in a world of a peaceful committee, in a world where you can talk it out, there's no incentive for the perpetrator to admit his crimes and take blame and fault. That's the exact mechanism that we needed that they don't have from this debate. The second clash is, what is the purpose of the government? We think throughout this argument, that throughout this analysis that came from our first speaker, and further elaborated on the second, there was a lack of response in terms of this analysis. Because firstly, the question of the role of the government, as we talked about and both sides agreed upon, is restoring the justice and upholding the rule of law. Notice that the premise of the role of government hinges on the failures that they had from before, which is the idea that the very fact that conflict existed and that there were victims means that it was the government's innate inability to protect these kind of minority and victims in the first place. Then secondly, the question we must ask in terms of what is the best action that necessarily must be made is retribution. Because notice they try to strawman us, like, look, this is over punishment. Like, look, there's no precedent, so this is unsure. We told you that this is proportional punishment in terms of the crimes you have. But sure, we'll bite the bullet. Maybe in these kind of budding democracies, where these kind of ideas get better, this isn't the best case situation that would solve fairly every other situation or every other problem in the first place. But comparatively speaking, as notified from a leader of opposition, we would rather live in a world where comparatively a system that's getting better is always the mechanism that we would opt into, rather than a system where you just completely avoid it in the first place. We gave mechanisms how this would get better. Secondly, they don't have a mechanism as to refusing to use the criminal justice system and law will on the long term make it better. Because on the long term, if you continue to refuse to use the rule of law because you don't think it's perfect, then you will never have a criminal justice system that is suitable to protect these kind of individuals on the long run. They have no long-term goal. Thirdly, we gave you the comparison. Fourthly, and most crucially, if you guys are the ones to say that these laws cannot moderate these kind of discussions, these laws can moderate these kind of discussions and make it fair, then surely these laws can also talk about what the issues were and how to properly retribute these kind of people from the first place. You can't have your cake and eat it by saying, look, the law is just enough for moderating discussions, but not enough for punishing these kind of individuals from the first place. That's the kind of things that we told you. But fourthly and most crucially is why is the government the best actor? Because we've analyzed from the very get-go of this debate that sure, maybe again we're playing in their best case scenario, government might not be the perfect actor. But in a post-conflict society where sides are drawn, where we don't know who to stand by, it is often the government who is in the best option to moderate and make the fair decision from the first place. In the worst case, the victims might be the ones, or the people in the minority might be the ones that control the narrative. But in the converse, these victims are the ones that require retribution, and in your world, you don't give. Yes, sir.
How will your side have objective judgments or punishments when judges go into the trial thinking that everyone is a child murderer?
I would say that's false in the sense that the very premise of criminal justice system where the judge goes in and says like, this person is a problem or this person is a criminal, is just factually wrong in a sense. But secondly, we would tell you that there is a criminal court, there are rules and procedures to ensure that these people aren't punished. Like, you can't just say just because the rule of law just got created that automatically it's not fair without giving proper mechanisms. The second argument, and as the third and final clash I'm going to be talking about, is the practical impacts that exist in our world. We gave you 3 distinctive impacts from our policy. Firstly, is strengthening the legitimacy of the government because we don't have this perceived injustice from the first place. We talked about it in our first speaker, a lack of rebuttal for the entire bench of government. Because the perceived injustice is the idea that, look, the person who raped my parents, the person who looted my house, is no longer punished. Because, voila, we're afraid that the rule of law might over-punish them in the first place. They've never properly mechanized or elaborated that how these kind of rules and procedures will properly integrate the victims and the perpetrators in the first place. Secondly, we talked about the idea of stabilizing national identity. Because the problem with this debate is it's a question of after conflict, how can we get past the idea of retribution and remorse and move on to reconstruction? In our world, we told you that stabilizing national identity is the best and most efficient outcome because when you do this, the practical benefit that happens is that people are finally understanding that the retribution has gone through and are willing to move onward in the long term for further development. On their world, they don't want to have this because if you don't prosecute them, the country will still continue to be divided and national identity will not be solidarity. But thirdly is the optimal distribution of resources. Because notice that even their whip speaker had fluff in terms of how they might potentially distribute resources without actually tackling the mechanisms of our second speaker's arguments. Why is this so? Because the very moment you grant amnesty to these individuals, letting them keep their wealth, you are letting them keep the wealth that they've unfairly stolen during the times of conflict and allow them to use it amongst themselves in a post-conflict situation. This is exactly what we see in Brazil, where people who live in favelas are oftentimes discriminated minorities, and people who live in the city are the ones that are like not the non-discriminated majorities. These are exclusive benefits that we provided. The benefits that they provided was, look, ceasefires happened earlier and we integrate them better. Like, in terms of ceasefire happening earlier, that is under the assumption that it is not a post-conflict state and the conflict continues to exist, but the very premise of that argument is wrong because the motion states that this is a post-conflict society. And integrating better can only happen under our rule when national identity is stabilized, where political social unrest is no longer utilized. That's the end goal that we support. We are more than proud to oppose this motion.
I thank that speaker for their speech, and I'd like to request the opposition reply speaker to conclude the case for opposition.
Two reasons why they lose this debate: mischaracterization and lack of engagement. Mischaracterization first. The most important case that they bank their entire win on is why they reduce conflicts and stop conflicts earlier than what opposition can provide. Notice how they agree that post-conflict societies should be focusing on long-term stability and why it doesn't engage at that point. Because conflicts aren't what's happening in the status quo. The one we're debating right now is a world in which conflicts have been seized and we have been moving on to a society in which we're trying to rebuild society out after these conflicts. Therefore, them arguing that stopping conflicts that are happening now intermittently cannot be winning the case because not only do we prove why that's not mutually exclusive, but further on, that's not the key to the debate. But another thing is how they say that dictatorial regimes that successfully stop the rebels are the core of the case. We should explain that's not. Because in order for the debate to progress and work, there has to be a point in which governments have to choose between granting amnesty or prosecuting certain individuals. Notice how dictatorial regimes that have already responded to people's discontent with violence and with oppression do not have the incentive, nor do they ever have, granted amnesty to these individuals that were often rebels. That's why the context that they operate on is not where the debate should lie on. But second of all, the lack of engagement. Because the backbone of today's debate, the principles that both teams has, is weakly engaged from government's perspective. Even everything else on our case sinks. We still win this debate if we protect the principle that governments are the only ones, and the best ones, and the responsible ones, and therefore they should be prosecuting these individuals. However, they only engage to the point in saying why our principle is not perfect and why it has some loopholes. Number one, not only did our first three speakers defend why that's not true, but number two, even if that were to be the case, it's not okay for governments to ditch victims of horrible war crimes and not have a principle in protecting these individuals. They are neglecting a government responsibility, they are neglecting what the government should be doing, that's why their principle doesn't stand in today's debate. But let's look at the debate a little bit closer with three questions. First question, government responsibility. First, I want to explain why we first explain on opposition why conflict happens between people, or the majority of conflicts at least, happen between people with resources and people without, and the latter are often oppressed by the former. This is why post-conflict societies of these debates are oftentimes when oppressive forces have been turned over and we have rebuilt a community in which we are going to grow from now on. They agree to this context when they say that the victims are the ones that are going to be judging these trials because that's where the debate applies in today's debate. Then, we've also explained on Intra's first speech on why the government is the responsible one to do this, why they're the only one to do this, and why they're the best one to do this. What was their response? Their response was on the lines of why judges would be unfair and they would have bad, unjust punishments. First of all, we explained why the existence of a power vacuum in which the perpetrators can flip the government over means that they must satisfy all individuals by being a fair, legitimate justice system. Second of all, we talked about why the ICC and other measures are often effective enough to modulate these justice systems. But third of all, even if that were to be true, we comparatively give the better side in providing a better world where we do the government's responsibility more. Second point, on long-term stability. The reason long-term stability is broken in most post-conflict societies isn't because of what they portray as two groups not being able to reconcile and understand each other. It's because of coup d'etats and flipping over governments when the powerful still remain in power. Opposition actively stops that by punishing these individuals, removing these individuals, and taking away the economic and political capital that they have. We set the moral high ground, we set a stable government. What government has to gain that moral is let them keep their advantage to the end, which means that they predict and promote more instability in the future. But third of all, my third argument on why amnesty locks money on the top of the spectrum, and that's why it strengthens the gap between the rich and the poor, was not engaged by their response. Their only response was, well, reparations are mutually exclusive. You can't give reparations unless you're keeping all the money in the rich that unfairly got that money. What opposition does is taking that money, unfairly deducted, away and get into the government that they can redistribute it back to all forms of society. Because we protect the government's responsibility, because we make a stable government, because we rehabilitate society, that's why we win this game.
Thank the speaker for their speech. I'd like to invite the proposition reply speaker to conclude the case for proposition and the debate in whole.
Members of this House, moral angst is not analysis. They might say that governments are the only ones. That may or may not be true. But what we've proven to you down the bench is that governments are also the most unjust ones to carry out this action. Because at the end of a sectarian conflict where there are multiple parties in one group fighting for the same power, that's when the group that's in power is likely to use the trial system advocated in order to suppress opposition. This was analysis that we said in the very beginning of this debate. We explained to you why this was true, and we explained to you why there were some conflicts. We didn't really get a response down the line. See, this debate is about post-conflict societies, and what we've been able to prove to you is that we're able to help societies move on because of the decision-making calculus before the conflict ends and even after the conflict ends. So the question in this debate is how we want to move on from these issues. And I'm going to take a walk through the two worlds that emerge at the end of this debate. And I want to show to you why the world of the opposition, a world of vengeance and hatred, was not going to allow us to move on. It was a world that did not even want to recognize the truth of a post-conflict society because they decided to assert that all post-conflict societies are magical with wonderful courts that are always going to listen to legal precedent. I'm not even sure why it's the case. The only reason they gave us, they have an incentive because they want to make sure that some people aren't angry. But I also gave an incentive to make sure that these people stop existing so that they can continue to push this analysis down the line. They can continue to push their agenda. But there was a world that was also going to make people more angry because we gave you reasons down the bench as to why they weren't going to finish with a single execution or a single trial. They didn't give to us any reason as to why once a single trial was finished, why the nation was going to have any closure, especially when it's always possible that even more individuals could continue to get angry down the line. But I also think that there's a world that continue to allow sectarian conflict to continue to silence people. Because when you finally do end up executing these people, or you do end up at least punishing these people, what ends up happening is that even more people get angry. Yes, alienating previous sections may not be palatable, but what I'm going to tell you is going to happen here is that you're going to restart conflicts and reopen wounds that many individuals have. So what's important is that if the courts on their side of the house aren't going to be fair, they don't get the only thing that they've been attempting to hang their hat on in this entire debate, which is retribution. But I also think that there's also a world where the conflict was still happening, because at the brink where one is losing the conflict in the first place, it's only in their world where they have the incentive to continue fighting. Because at the point in which you lose, the government itself, as using the language, will remember you as a rapist or as someone who shoots children, which means that you're not going to get any of the benefits that they want to talk to you about. There's also a world also where we would not be able to prosecute the dictator, because more often than not, if this person existed, he's going to be outside of the country, outside of extradition laws. This is an analysis that was given to you in second proposition that you did not really respond to. So the end of this debate, the world of the opposition did not allow countries to heal. It did not allow us to move on, and it did not even have justice. So, let's now talk to you about the world of the proposition. And I want to point out that it did not actually engage with the logic that we gave to you about truth and reconciliation committees. The reason as to why they were significantly less combative is because the stakes that occur are significantly lower. That means that the outcome of, say, people not liking you is not going to be, as they say, being sent to prison. What this means is you're more likely to get a narrative that says that there are multiple sides to this conflict, there are more groups of people to this, and we need to move on in order to be a better nation together. We were a world that recognized that people are more willing to come forward on our side, that we would be able to move the nation on because now post-conflict societies have the incentive to even stop fighting in the first place. And we recognize that sometimes it's unfortunate that we might not be able to carry out that strict form of justice that they say on their side of the house, which wasn't really. But I think the greatest justice that we do to people is that we allow a society to move on, but more crucially than that, we are a society that stopped the conflict in the first place. I think it's important because the world of proposition stopped conflicts, and the world of proposition allowed us to move on away from the anger and hatred, the bottomless pit that opposition sought to give us as a solution. We cannot get a better future if we are stuck in the past. We're very proud to propose.